one more step into the light. If you're listening, then most likely you are one of the people who have taken one more step into the light of Christ. So thank you for joining us. I want to talk to you about a leader and then talk to you about leadership. Specifically, a leader that hears is a leader that can be heard. I'm going to say that one more time. A leader that hears is a leader that can be heard. What do I mean by that? When a leader that hears God's voice and hears the people speaks, the people hear God. So think about that. I want to unpack something real quick here. I want to talk about a young man who was ambitious and anxious. Ambitious and anxious. And it wasn't until he surrendered his life to God did he really begin to step into being the leader that God made him to be. And in him stepping into this, he began to hear God's voice more and more and more. And then eventually he started to listen to people too, because he was so ambitious and so focused on what he wanted, he didn't really hear or see the people. But then, having humbled himself under listening to God's voice, obeying God and submitting himself to God. In fact, specifically what he did goes right with Romans 12:1. Let's look at this. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Romans 12:1. I'm going to repeat that part where it says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So that type of submission to God, when you begin to do that, you can hear God. And in being unhumbled and hearing God, you begin to hear people. And so then you can know the people. And when you know them, you can speak to them. And when you speak to them, they can tell and they listen. But here's the thing. If you're listening to God's voice, and you've heard them, and so they're now listening and they can hear what you're saying, and you've listened to God's voice and that's what you share, then what happens? They hear God because they hear what you're saying and you're sharing what God has shared with you. That's the type of leadership we need. That's the type of preaching and teaching that we need, right? We don't just need people's opinions. We need the word of God, and we need the words of God today to be the generation that takes the next step into the light, to take that one more step into the light. Now, getting back to that young man, when he began to do that, then he stepped into his calling and he was given vision of creatives coming together collectively and innovating today, using storytelling, in particular, things like film and video and music and media and immersive content and so forth, using these things to spread the gospel. And that is how people are going to respond to the gospel today, through the storytelling of today. And as a vision of revival and awakening, that's what it is. One more step into the light is awakening revival in this time. That's the vision. That's the mission. And I was that young man, and I am that young man. Can I still consider myself a young man? I got clean shaven, so I could say that today. But I want to go into someone else much more important than myself. I want to look at 1 Samuel 3. A lot of you guys probably already know or are familiar with the story of Samuel, an apprentice of the prophet Eli. And this is Old Testament times, right before David, if you know David and Goliath. And Samuel's a young man at this point. And Samuel is sleeping and he hears God's voice, but he doesn't realize what it is. And he goes to Eli and he goes back and forth thinking Eli's calling him. And Eli's like, I'm not calling you. But finally, the prophet Eli realizes that this young man is now hearing from the Lord as he once did. And he tells him to go back in your bedroom and say, speak, for your servant is listening. And that to be the response to hearing God's voice. And think about that. That's not just like a prompt, like a word prompt, like a spell you say and then magic happens. No. It is a heart posture too of speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. But here's something you guys have probably heard about the story before. And so that's why I'm not giving a message on 1 Samuel 3. But I want to point out something in the passage that you might have missed. Check this out. You might have missed this point. And this is crucial to understand the story. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. So this is 1 Samuel 3:19. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. So again, a leader that hears is a leader that is heard. A leader that hears God, right? And he lets none of his words fall to the ground. That's a trustworthy person for God to speak to and to give him leadership to actually share to the people. A leader that hears God. That's crucial right there. Humbling yourself under God and hears God. And then you hear the people, and that allows for you to know the people, know how to speak to the people. And you hear God and you hear the people. And so when you go to speak, people hear the voice of God. Do you see it? You see what I'm saying? Like how that comes together? And it's practical too, right? It's about going, and you can use this specific prompt. Speak, Lord, for your servant listening. Again, it's not about like just saying the words. It's about having the heart posture of waiting on hearing the Lord's voice. So a leader that hears is a leader that can be heard. Thank you.